The courtroom was supposed to be silent that morning, until a 12-year-old boy stood up and challenged the entire system. He wasn't a lawyer. He wasn't rich. He was just a kid, fighting to save his mother from a crime she didn't commit. But when he revealed who the real thief was, every judge, lawyer, and guard in that room froze in fear, because the truth he carried could destroy them all. The courtroom buzzed with restless murmurs that morning, a sea of faces waiting for entertainment rather than justice. Dusty sunlight slanted through the blinds, falling across the polished floor where a small boy stood beside his trembling mother. Kevin Washington, just 12 years old, stood straight, chin high, eyes unwavering. His mother, Deborah, a janitor who spent her nights scrubbing the same courthouse floors, sat handcuffed and pale. The accusation was simple, yet devastating: theft of $50,000 from the evidence room. But for Kevin, this wasn't about money. It was about truth, and he wasn't leaving without it. Judge William Carter, a stern man confined to a wheelchair, tapped his gavel impatiently. "Young man, this is not a stage for childish games. Sit down before I hold you in contempt." His voice carried a trace of mockery, the kind that dripped with disbelief. Kevin didn't flinch. "Your Honor," he said clearly, his small voice cutting through the noise, "my mother didn't steal anything." The crowd chuckled, some hiding their laughter behind papers. Carter's lips curled in disdain. "And how would you know that, son?" He sneered. Kevin met his gaze calmly. "Because I know who did." The laughter grew louder. Even the bailiff smirked. But one man, standing near the judge's bench, froze for a fraction of a second. His name was Thomas Mitchell, the judge's assistant. Kevin's sharp eyes caught that momentary tremor, the way Mitchell's fingers clutched the pen too tightly, the sweat beading along his temple despite the cold air. Kevin noticed everything. For 6 months he had been quietly watching, listening, learning. Every time his mother came home crying from work about being blamed for missing files or misplaced cash, Kevin had followed her back to the courthouse after hours, pretending to help with cleaning. But in truth, he was gathering evidence, piece by piece. Now, standing in front of powerful men who dismissed him as a child, he finally had the chance to use it. "Your Honor," Kevin continued, "the person who took the money is right here in this courtroom." A collective murmur swept through the audience like a wave. The judge's eyebrows rose. "Are you accusing someone in my court, boy?" Kevin nodded. "Yes, sir." Carter's tone turned sharp. "And who might that be?" Kevin's gaze shifted deliberately to Thomas Mitchell. The room fell silent. Mitchell forced a nervous laugh. "This is ridiculous," he muttered, eyes darting around. Before Kevin could speak again, the prosecutor, Davidson, slammed his hand on the table. "Enough of this nonsense. We're wasting the court's time on the imagination of a janitor's son." His words dripped with arrogance, and his smirk widened as he added, "It's in their nature to steal and lie. Your Honor, let's finish this." The phrase made Deborah's eyes glisten with shame, but Kevin remained unmoved. He tilted his head slightly and said softly, "You shouldn't talk like that, sir. Words have a way of finding their way back to the person who deserves them most." The judge banged his gavel again, pretending authority he didn't really feel. "That's enough," he barked. "Case closed. The evidence is clear. Mrs. Washington is guilty." But Kevin interrupted, his voice cutting cleanly through the room. "You never looked at the evidence." The sudden courage in his tone startled everyone. Even the bailiff hesitated. "You only listen to men who already decided she was guilty because of how she looks, not because of what she's done." His words echoed through the courtroom. Deborah whispered for him to stop, terrified for her son, but Kevin took a step forward. He reached into his small school backpack and placed a worn notebook on the defense table. "I wrote down everything," he said. "Every night, every person who entered that evidence room. Every time the lights turned on after hours. Every face." The judge frowned but said nothing. Kevin continued, voice steady. "6 months ago, on a Friday night, someone used a master key to access the vault. I saw him. I saw his shoes, his hands, and that watch he's wearing right now." His finger pointed at Thomas Mitchell's wrist, a gleaming Rolex catching the light. Gasps filled the room. Mitchell's hand twitched as he tried to cover the watch. "This is absurd," he stammered. "I bought it myself." Kevin nodded slightly. "Then maybe you can explain how someone on a $45,000 salary bought a Rolex worth more than your car." The laughter that followed wasn't mocking this time. It was nervous. The judge turned toward his assistant, suddenly uneasy. "Mitchell?" he asked. But Mitchell said nothing. His face was pale, his lips trembling. Kevin took a step closer to the bench, his small sneakers squeaking on the marble floor. His voice lowered, but it carried an authority far beyond his years. "Your Honor, you've been sitting in that chair for 8 years, watching people beg for justice. You didn't listen when my mother begged. But you'll listen now because this time, the truth is standing right in front of you." The room was frozen. Even the judge's hand trembled slightly on the armrest. The boy's words seemed to fill every corner of the room, heavy with something more powerful than anger. Conviction. "First," Kevin said softly, "release my mother." He let the silence stretch for a heartbeat. Then he looked directly at the judge and added, "Then I'll make you walk again." The laughter that had once filled the courtroom died instantly. You could hear the ticking of the clock, the creak of the judge's chair, the faint hum of the air vent above. Every pair of eyes turned to Kevin, this small, calm boy standing against a wall of power. Mitchell's hands were shaking now, his breathing shallow. The judge stared at him in disbelief. Kevin's mother wept quietly, half in fear, half in awe of her son's courage. And as the bailiff stepped forward to restore order, everyone in that room felt something shift, like justice itself had just been challenged by a 12-year-old child who refused to bow. The gavel slammed hard against the bench, echoing through the tense courtroom. "Enough!" Judge Carter barked, his face red with fury. "I will not have a child disrupt my court. Bailiff, remove him immediately." The bailiff stepped forward, but Kevin didn't flinch. He stood his ground, his small hands balled into fists at his sides. "You can throw me out," he said firmly, "but you can't erase the truth. I have proof my mother is innocent." His voice was calm, but carried a strange power, something that made even the bailiff hesitate. Murmurs spread through the room again, a low wave of confusion and disbelief. Judge Carter's voice cracked with irritation. "Proof? You're 12 years old. You don't even understand what that word means." Kevin's eyes didn't waver. "Maybe not the way you do, sir," he replied, "but I know lies when I see them." The judge was about to shout again when, suddenly, the heavy oak doors of the courtroom creaked open. Everyone turned toward the sound. A woman in a tailored gray suit strode in, her heels clicking sharply against the floor. Her presence alone commanded silence. She carried a single black folder and a calm, unshakable confidence that filled the room like electricity. "I believe the boy was about to show you exactly what proof means," she said smoothly. The judge blinked, startled. "Who are you?" he demanded. The woman approached the defense table and placed her folder down beside Kevin. "Patricia Williams," she said, producing her credentials. "Civil rights attorney. I represent the Washington family." The crowd gasped. Even the prosecutor's smirk faltered. Patricia Williams was not just any lawyer. Her name carried weight in every federal building across the country. She had a reputation for walking into impossible cases and walking out with justice. "Objection," Davidson snapped. "This case is closed." "She can't just waltz in." Patricia didn't even look at him. "Sit down, counselor," she said, her voice razor-sharp. "The Department of Justice has already authorized the reopening of this case under Title VII, Section 1983, Racial Bias and Procedural Misconduct." She slid a stamped document across the judge's bench. Carter picked it up, his face tightening as he read the official seal. Federal authorization. His authority over the case had just been stripped away. Kevin looked up at Patricia, a faint smile tugging at his lips. "You got my email?" he asked quietly. She nodded once. "Every word of it." The crowd buzzed louder now, people whispering, phones discreetly recording. Patricia turned to face the judge, her tone cool and precise. "Your Honor, this child reached out to me weeks ago. He suspected that evidence was being manipulated, and his suspicions were correct. My team verified multiple financial irregularities connected to one of your own staff members. Her eyes slid deliberately toward Thomas Mitchell. Mitchell's face drained of color. "This is ridiculous," he stammered. "That boy's making things up." Patricia ignored him. She opened her folder and held up a printed bank statement. "Mr. Mitchell, your salary is $45,000 a year. In the last 6 months, you purchased a $300,000 house, a brand new BMW, and took 3 weekend trips to the Grand Casino in Atlantic City. Care to explain that?" Gasps rippled through the courtroom. Cameras flashed. Mitchell started sweating, tugging at his collar. I won some money," he muttered, voice shaking. Patricia's eyebrow arched. "Then perhaps the Internal Revenue Service will confirm that for us. Or maybe the FBI." She gave a subtle signal toward the back of the courtroom. The doors opened again, and 2 men in dark suits entered. Federal agents, badges gleaming under the light. The tension hit its peak. The judge looked stunned, his lips parting but no words coming out. The prosecutor sank into his chair, realizing the storm that was unfolding. Kevin's mother, Deborah, could barely breathe, tears forming in her eyes as she looked at her son in disbelief. Mitchell's breathing quickened. He backed away, knocking over a chair as panic set in. "This is insane!" he shouted. "You can't prove anything." Patricia's voice remained steady. "You're right, we can't. But the surveillance footage from the courthouse security system can. And the fingerprint report from the evidence vault will confirm yours are on the safe handle." The color drained completely from his face. "You can't—" But before he could finish, one of the federal agents stepped forward. "Thomas Mitchell," the agent said coldly. "You're under arrest for embezzlement and obstruction of justice." The courtroom erupted into chaos. Reporters scribbled furiously, spectators whispered, and Deborah gasped as the handcuffs clicked around Mitchell's wrists. He struggled, but the agents were firm, dragging him toward the exit as camera flashes lit up the room. The judge's gavel pounded over the noise. "Order, order in the court," he shouted, but no one was listening. His authority was slipping through his fingers, and he knew it. Kevin stood silently, watching as the man who ruined his mother's life was led away in disgrace. When the room finally settled, Patricia turned back to Judge Carter. "Your Honor," she said firmly, "I move for immediate dismissal of all charges against Deborah Washington. The prosecution's evidence has been proven tainted, and the real perpetrator is now in custody." The judge's face was unreadable as he looked between Kevin, Patricia, and Deborah. His pride was wounded, but the truth was undeniable. After a long pause, he muttered, "Case dismissed." A wave of relief swept through the courtroom. Deborah sobbed into her hands as Kevin wrapped his arms around her. The sound of chains unlocking echoed softly, the sweetest sound they had ever heard. Patricia placed a gentle hand on Kevin's shoulder and whispered, "You did good, kid." Kevin turned back toward the bench. Judge Carter sat motionless, his hands gripping the armrests of his wheelchair. The boy's voice broke the silence once more, calm but cutting. "Now, Your Honor," he said, "do you still think my mother is guilty?" The judge looked at him, eyes filled with something that might have been shame, or perhaps fear. Kevin didn't wait for an answer. He simply took his mother's hand and walked out of that courtroom, leaving behind the echoes of truth that had finally shattered the walls of corruption. The courtroom had barely settled after Mitchell's arrest when Patricia turned toward Kevin and gave a small nod. The chaos had quieted, but the tension remained thick, pulsing in the air like a storm waiting to break. "Kevin," she said calmly, her voice slicing through the whispers, "show them the rest." The boy hesitated for just a second, then reached into his old, worn-out backpack, the same one he carried to school every day. From it, he pulled out a dented silver laptop, its edges covered with stickers and scratches. He set it carefully on the defense table and connected a small USB cable to the courtroom's sound system. The judge's brow furrowed, his hands tightening around the arms of his wheelchair. "What are you doing?" he demanded. Kevin didn't answer. He just looked up, eyes steady and calm, and said, "You wanted proof. Here it is. A low hum filled the speakers as the laptop came to life. The courtroom lights dimmed slightly, the sound of the crowd fading into a tense silence. Then a voice echoed through the speakers, loud, clear, unmistakable. "It's in their nature to steal," the voice said, dripping with arrogance and contempt. Gasps erupted across the room. Everyone recognized it instantly. It was the prosecutor, Davidson, the same man who had just been mocking Kevin minutes ago. His face went pale, his jaw tightening as reporters jumped to their feet, scrambling to record the moment. Patricia didn't say a word. She simply folded her arms, eyes locked on Davidson as the recording continued. Kevin pressed another key, and a second voice joined the first. "No need to investigate much," said Judge Carter's voice, cold and dismissive. "We already know the outcome." The sound of papers shuffling followed, along with laughter that now rang hollow and sickening in the echo of the courtroom. For a moment, Carter sat frozen in disbelief. His own voice, his own prejudice, now played back for everyone to hear. The entire room erupted. Reporters shouted over each other. Cameras flashed. People in the audience gasped and covered their mouths. A woman in the back stood up, tears streaming down her face as she whispered, "My brother went to prison because of you." Patricia let the noise swell before raising a single hand, commanding silence without needing to speak. Kevin opened another folder on his computer and pressed play again. More voices filled the speakers, private conversations, late-night jokes exchanged between courthouse officials, sneering comments about black defendants, about poor families, about how justice could be bent for the right people. Each clip was more damning than the last. The air grew heavier with every second. Even the guards by the doors looked uneasy, shifting their weight as they listened. The prosecutor's hands were trembling now. "This is illegal," Davidson shouted. "These recordings are—" Patricia cut him off with a sharp look. "All legally obtained," she said coolly. This boy recorded them while accompanying his mother during after-hours cleaning shifts. Public spaces. No warrant needed. She stepped closer to the bench, her voice rising with authority. "And for the record, these files have already been uploaded and sent to the National Council of Magistrates, the FBI, and the national media. Even if you try to stop us, it's too late." The reporters cheered softly under their breath, knowing this was history unfolding before them. Judge Carter's face had gone white. He fumbled for his gavel but didn't strike it. His eyes darted toward the exits as though hoping to escape the sound of his own guilt. Kevin remained calm, his small fingers typing methodically as he pulled up the timestamps and details of each recording. "This one," he said quietly, "was from May 3rd at 8:45 p.m. in Chamber 2A. Another clip began to play, Davidson and Carter laughing together. "Another one," Kevin continued. "June 12th, 6:15 p.m., hallway outside the evidence room." His voice was emotionless, steady, almost mechanical. But behind that composure there was a fire, a quiet, righteous anger that burned through every word. With each recording, the courtroom seemed to shrink. The walls felt closer, the air heavier. Even the judge's wheelchair squeaked softly as he shifted nervously. Patricia's voice broke through again, firm and unwavering. "Your Honor," she said, "we formally demand full acquittal of Deborah Washington and a federal investigation into every official who took part in this corruption." She paused, her eyes sharp. "That includes you." The judge's eyes flicked up to hers, full of fear and something else, something like shame. He opened his mouth to speak, but no sound came out. Then something strange happened. His fingers twitched. At first, it was barely noticeable, just a slight movement. But then his legs that had been motionless for 8 long years, began to tremble. Gasps erupted around the courtroom as Judge Carter looked down, disbelief washing over his face. His right foot shifted slightly, scraping against the floor. "Oh my God," someone whispered. Even Patricia looked stunned. Carter's hands trembled as he gripped the arms of his wheelchair, pushing slowly, shakily. His body rose, inch by inch, until he was standing, wobbly, weak, but standing. Every eye in the room turned to Kevin. He stood quietly, his expression unreadable. The same boy who had once been laughed at now stood taller than anyone in the room without moving an inch. "I said I'd make you walk again," Kevin said softly, his voice calm, almost gentle. "But not the way you expected." The words hung in the air like a verdict. The courtroom was silent. Even the cameras stopped clicking. Carter stared at Kevin, his mouth opening but no words coming out. For the first time, the powerful man looked small, stripped of arrogance, stripped of excuses. Kevin closed the laptop slowly, the final click echoing through the room. The truth had spoken for itself. Patricia placed a hand on his shoulder, proud and silent. Deborah wept quietly, realizing that her son had done what grown men with power and education had failed to do. He had exposed the truth. The judge sank back into his chair, staring at his trembling hands. The courtroom, once filled with laughter at a child's courage, was now drenched in the heavy silence of revelation. Kevin stood still, his eyes never leaving the bench. He didn't smile, didn't gloat. He just whispered, "Justice isn't blind, Your Honor. It just needed someone brave enough to open its eyes." The storm that began in one courtroom didn't end there. Within 24 hours, the recordings Kevin played had spread across the country. Every major news network replayed the audio again and again. The prosecutor's sneering voice, the judge's cruel laughter, and the quiet determination of a 12-year-old boy who refused to be silenced. Hashtags filled social media. "Justice at you." "Kevin Washington, his truth speaks." People who had once doubted the Washington family now marched in support of them. Protests erupted outside courthouses across the state, demanding reform. What had started as a simple plea for one woman's freedom had turned into a movement that shook the pillars of the judicial system. Judge William Carter resigned within a week. His statement to the press was short, broken, and full of regret. The recordings of his words, his laughter at injustice, played on every screen in America. Once celebrated as a pillar of fairness, he was now the face of corruption and bias. He had regained the ability to walk, but he found no peace in it. Reporters followed him everywhere, and former friends refused to take his calls. His once grand home felt empty, filled only with the echo of his guilt. For years he had believed he was untouchable. Now he was just another man stripped bare by the truth. The miracle that allowed him to walk again was a cruel irony. His body free, but his soul weighed down forever. Prosecutor Davidson's fall came next. The Bar Association moved swiftly, reviewing his cases and finding patterns of bias, false testimonies, and manipulated evidence. He was disbarred publicly in a televised hearing. As he left the building, reporters surrounded him demanding answers, but he said nothing. He packed his belongings into a small car and left the city quietly, unable to face the stares and whispers. His career was over, his reputation gone. Thomas Mitchell, the judge's assistant, stood trial for embezzlement, money laundering, and perjury. The evidence was overwhelming: the bank records, casino receipts, and the stolen money trail that led straight to him. He was sentenced to 8 years in federal prison. During the trial, he tried to shift blame, to claim he was following orders, but no one listened. The courtroom that once felt like his playground now became his cage. When Kevin and his mother attended the sentencing, Mitchell couldn't meet their eyes. For the first time, the man who once looked down on them saw what true strength looked like. Deborah Washington's story took a very different turn. The state issued a formal apology, and she was reinstated at her job. Not as a janitor, but as the new administrative supervisor of courthouse operations. The very halls that once whispered about her now fell silent when she walked by. Her co-workers looked at her with respect, some even with guilt. She carried herself with grace, never seeking revenge. The truth speaks for itself, she often told people who came to congratulate her. But the brightest part of her life wasn't the title or the salary. It was the boy who had made the impossible happen. Kevin became a national symbol of courage and justice. News outlets interviewed him, schools invited him to speak, and journalists called him the boy who taught America to listen. But Kevin didn't let fame distract him. With Patricia Williams as his mentor, he started working on something bigger. Together, they founded a small community initiative to help families who faced racial or legal injustice. Patricia often said, "You're 12, but you've already done what most adults never dare to do. You've changed the system." Kevin just smiled and said, "I just wanted my mom back." Months later, he launched his own YouTube channel called Justice at 12 Ween. Sitting behind a simple desk, wearing his school uniform, Kevin spoke directly to the camera. He explained how to understand your rights, how to recognize unfair treatment, how to ask questions that matter. The channel grew rapidly, reaching millions of young viewers who saw him not just as a hero, but as one of their own. His first video ended with a line that defined him. "You don't have to be old to know what's right. You just have to be brave enough to say it." In one interview, a reporter asked Kevin how he knew he could prove his mother innocent. He paused for a long moment, thinking carefully before answering. "I didn't know if I could," he admitted, "but I knew I had to try, because if I didn't, nobody else would." The interviewer smiled, clearly moved, but Kevin's eyes remained calm, steady. When the same reporter asked about Judge Carter walking again, Kevin's answer was even quieter, almost philosophical. "Sometimes," he said, "the body responds when the soul is forced to face the truth." As the months passed, life slowly returned to normal. But it wasn't the same world anymore. The courthouse where Deborah once scrubbed floors was now under federal supervision, with new judges, new rules, and new training focused on fairness and equality. On the day the reforms were officially announced, Kevin and his mother walked through those marble halls together. She wore a navy blue blazer, the color of her new position, and Kevin carried his school backpack, the same one that had once held the laptop that changed everything. Reporters smiled as the pair walked past, but Kevin wasn't there for cameras. He just wanted to see the place where the truth finally won. Outside, across the city, Judge Carter walked slowly down a quiet street. No reporters followed him now. He had regained his steps, but every one of them felt heavy. The sound of Kevin's words haunted him, not with anger, but with the painful clarity of someone who finally understood. He stopped at a park bench, sat down, and watched children play in the distance, wondering what kind of man he could have been if he'd listened sooner. Back at the courthouse, Kevin looked up at his mother and smiled. "We did it," he said softly. She nodded, tears filling her eyes. They stood for a moment in the same courtroom that once broke them, now filled with light and change. And as they walked out hand in hand, one truth lingered above all else. True justice isn't about power or age. It's about courage, truth, and the refusal to accept injustice, no matter who you are.